Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back for day 6 of Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season. So we got a number of interesting mythics and rares to talk about today, and a couple of lower rarity things that I want to talk about that certainly are going to be limited playable. But before we do that, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season and beyond. Alright, so let's dive into our first card of the day, which is the Mind Render. For 3 blue mana, you get a legendary enchantment creature. That's a nightmare. It's a 10/1, and the Mind Render cannot be blocked. If a source you control will deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. So Mind Render is not a creature where you're likely to you're looking to damage out your opponent. What you're doing with Mind Render is this is going to be a mill card. You're going to be able to mill your opponent 10 cards every single turn when you attack with this. And I think that's an interesting strategy in Standard. It might have just enough support to make this, definitely a very viable strategy. Now, is it going to die to a lot of things? Absolutely. But it's going to have to be targeted removal by your opponent. Otherwise, 2, 3, 4 attacks, and your opponent is pretty much out of cards, and you're going to win the game under those circumstances. Now, we already have Jace that does something similar to this, where you can mill. Depending on how much loyalty it has, it can use 3 times its loyalty, so 15 cards. So I think there's definitely enough support for mill in Standard right now that Mind Render might be the piece that makes that deck playable in Standard. Next, we've got Reluctant Role Model for 1 and a white mana. You get a Human Survivor. That's a 2/2. And it has survival, and at the beginning of your second main phase, if Reluctant Role Model is tapped, put a flying, lifelink, or +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever Reluctant Role Model or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put those counters on up to 1 target creature. So you can move around counters when things die. Now, we know already in Standard, we've got a couple of payoff cards for this. We talked about one of those yesterday with our Orphan, who can tap all of your creatures and get +1/+1 for each of them. So that's one method. But then we also have our Convoke cards and or a card like Warden of the Inner Sky that taps things, so our Convoke cards. So I think there's enough support for this in Standard, where this is a card I think is definitely going to be Standard playable, and it'll be interesting to see how deck builders use it to take advantage of the abilities that it does have on it to give counters not only to itself, but then if something else that has counters on it dies, to be able to move those around as well. Next, we've got Omnivorous Fly Trap for 2 and a green mana. You get a plant that's a 2/4 with Delirium. And whenever Omnivorous Fly Trap enters or attacks, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. Then if there are 6 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, double the number of +1/+1 counters on those creatures. So this is a card that, if you can get Delirium, then it is a card that is definitely going to be playable in Standard. But the problem is, can you guarantee that you're going to get Delirium? So unless you're going to be doing some self-milling or something like that, I think while this is a nice card, it does some very good things. When you have that problem of, well, you've got just 3 card types in your graveyard, you can't get the 4th, then I think it's going to frustrate you, and it's going to end up not being all that good in Standard. But if you can build a deck in such a way that you can almost guarantee yourself game after game after game, you're going to get that Delirium ability, then you're going to really do some things, because when you've got 6 or more cards types among cards in your graveyard, then you get to double the number of +1/+1 counters on those creatures. So very powerful card if you can get it active. So 4 to get the Delirium, 6 types of cards to get the doubling effect on it. So very hard to, I think, accomplish most of the time in Standard. So I think maybe in older formats this might have a better chance. Certainly Commander, you're likely to have a better chance of seeing this be an effective card for you. Next, we've got our our first room of the day, and this one is Unholy Lobby and Ritual Chamber. So Unholy Lobby costs 2 and a black mana, and at the beginning of your end step, you get to draw a card. And if you control a demon, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Otherwise, you lose 2 life. So 2 life to draw a card, that's pretty painful. So I'm not sure that that's going to be good enough for standard at this point. Now, if you're able to get a demon on the field, then yes, it's going to be great because your opponent's going to lose 2 life, you gain 2 life every turn, and you get a card. So from that standpoint, I think that's really a quality card. But the question is, can you meet that requirement of having a demon? And we do have a number of demons in standard right now, but they cost 4 or more mana. So you're likely to have to get one of those on the field before you play Unholy Lobby, and that may not be really feasible in standard on a consistent basis. Okay, the other side of the room is Ritual Chamber for 3 and 2 black mana. When you unlock this door, create a 6/6 black demon creature token with flying. So if you can maybe get this creature token down first, then you unlock the Unholy Lobby, then I think it's worthwhile. But again, I think there's just so many hoops to jump through that this probably is going to be one of the lesser played rare rooms that we're going to see in standard. Next, we've got an uncommon room in Greenhouse and Rickety Gazebo. So Greenhouse costs 2 and a green mana, and lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. So very nice ability there to, in essence, mana fix yourself for 3 mana. And then Rickety Gazebo for 3 and a green mana. When you unlock this door, mill 4 cards, then return up to 2 permanent cards from among them to your hand. So 4 mana, mill 4, get 2 cards from among those cards that were milled and get to put them in your hand. So decent on that side as well. So I think if this card does see standard play, it's going to be about the Greenhouse side where you're able to just mana fix yourself into whatever you need to do. And I think that might be good enough for standard. Next, we've got Trial of Anguish for a red mana. You get a sorcery and choose 2 target creatures controlled by the same opponent. That player chooses one of those creatures. Trial of Anguish deals 5 to that creature, and the other can't block this turn. So interesting sorcery. Basically 1 mana, you get to deal 5 damage to a creature. So we are in an aggro strategy where I think this is actually fairly good because in all likelihood your opponent's going to have multiple creatures on the field. So you get to kill one of them most likely, and then you can force another one not to block, and that might be just what you need to win a game. And we know red is all about going fast, and this is a way to help red go a little bit faster. And our next card is Split Skin Doll for 1 and a white mana. You get an artifact creature, that's a toy, it's a 2/1, and when Split Skin Doll enters, draw a card, then discard a card unless you control another creature with power 2 or less. So I think this is going to be standard playable because we've seen cards like this in the past that were 2 mana and usually 1/1s that drew a card and they saw play in standard. So I would think that Split Skin Doll in the right build is going to do that as well. Alright, our last 2 cards of the day that I want to talk about are Overgrown Zealot and Growing Dread. So Overgrown Zealot for 1 and a green mana, you get a 0/4 Elf Druid. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, or you can tap it to add 2 mana of any one color and spend this mana only to turn permanents face up. So this is a card that is really designed to go along with the Manifest Dread mechanic from the set. So if you've got this, you've got cards that can Manifest Dread, I think it's going to work well together. So if we do see a deck like that, then this probably is a card that would work well with that in standard and definitely work well in limited. And final card of the day I want to talk about is Growing Dread for a green and a blue mana. You get an enchantment with flash, and when Growing Dread enters, you Manifest Dread, and that means look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into your graveyard. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. And whenever you turn a permanent face up, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And that's actually an important ability on this, which I think makes this playable in Standard. So obviously you're going to manifest dread one time. And we also have Disguise and other abilities that turn cards face down. Going to make this good enough to see some Standard play if we build a deck around the mechanic of turning cards face down and then turning them up and getting the benefit of it. All right, that's Duskmourn Day 6 spoilers. Those are the cards that I want to talk about for today. We had some other lower rarity stuff that I might get to over the weekend, but thanks for staying to the end of the video. And here I've left links to the Day 4 and Day 5 preview videos for you. But again, thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will see you in the next one.